Well, hey there, YouTube, and welcome to Thursday's edition of The Breakfast Club. Got that funk here on my new day for the foreseeable future. And JJ Talks is taking over Saturday, and Sword Sage is taking over Monday. So a bit of a new rotation here on The Breakfast Club, but I suppose that's all for the best, considering it's better for everybody involved. There's quite a few things I actually have on my mind that I could make a video about and that I wouldn't actually mind talking about. But considering I want to make this video relatively concise, I'm just going to mention two things in this video, and I'll save the smallest one for last. The one I really want to talk about is the fact that with the whole sort of gun control debate that's been going on ever since the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, and in the aftermath of the March for Our Lives demonstrations, there's been an awful lot of people online in various different forums talking about how they believe that the Second Amendment exists as its function, its purpose is to enable people to be armed with firearms so that if the government becomes tyrannical, the population can rise up and resist. That's pretty much known as rebellion or insurrection. Any kind of armed resistance of the governing power is insurrection. By definition, it's treason. The funny thing is, the Second Amendment doesn't make any mention of this, and there's no part of the Constitution that does. I was having this conversation. We actually were arguing, but it was quite a polite argument insofar as nobody got nasty or called each other names or anything like that. But I had a pretty long argument with someone on Twitter about this a week or so ago. And I mentioned to him that there's nothing in the Constitution that gives you the right to commit insurrection, but there is mention in the Constitution of the definition of treason, which is to make war against your country. By definition, that's taking up arms against the governing power. Article 3, Section 3. So it's right there that weapons don't exist so that you can rebel against the government. That's a complete fallacy. The guy I was talking to on Twitter pointed out that the Constitution is invalid when the government becomes tyrannical. If the government isn't enforcing the laws of the Constitution, that's when people have the right to rebel, because in the Declaration of Independence it says that it's your duty to throw off a tyrannical government. But the Declaration of Independence is not a legal document in the sense that it doesn't codify any laws as such. It was the reasoning for why we broke away from England back in the day. And there's a long list of usurpations, as they were called, in the Declaration of Independence, the rationale why the colonies decided to declare themselves independent of the sovereign. And I don't think you can use the Declaration of Independence. I mean, I agree that it's your duty to throw off a tyranny if that's what you really believe you're living in. But here's my question, okay? If you're a gun owner in the United States of America, and you also think that part of the reason the Second Amendment exists is so that people can have the chance at fighting back against the government if the government becomes tyrannical, here's my question, and I want you to give this careful consideration before you answer, but I want to hear as many comments from everyone out there, especially gun owners. Especially gun owners with this particular rationale about the Constitution. What would it take for you to consider the government to be sufficiently tyrannical that you personally would take up arms against the government? And let's be clear about what we're talking about. You would be taking it upon yourself to shoot U.S. soldiers with your guns. Police or soldiers or both. Maybe even other armed citizens who are on the side of the government. Are you really prepared to shoot U.S. soldiers? And what would it take the government to do that would be so tyrannical? When I was speaking to this fellow on Twitter, he said that if the government violated the Constitution, that would be sufficient reason for people to take up arms against it. And I pointed out to him, and I said, well, why aren't you rebelling then? Because ever since the passing of the Patriot Act back in 2003, I think, the Fourth Amendment has been pretty much abrogated by many of the provisions in the Patriot Act, Your Fourth Amendment rights are the rights to sort of privacy from the government. The government's not supposed to have the right to search you or seize your possessions without due process and without sufficient cause to do a search in the first place. But those rights are pretty much gone now. The government has access to our emails and so forth, for example, if they want it. And that's just one example. The point is that the Fourth Amendment is really not worth the paper it's written on anymore, and I haven't seen any armed rebellion about that. So this idea that the Constitution, if the government violates that the people are going to rise up, to me is plainly inaccurate. And so I pressed him on the point, and he basically said, yeah, well, the different amendments, he said people could rise up. I'm not saying they would rise up. He said, but if the government ever tried to take our guns away, I can guarantee you there'd be armed rebellion. And on that point, I agree up to in the sense that there are people who would resist having their guns taken away by shooting at the people who tried to take them away. I don't know if that's the same thing as an armed insurrection, because as far as I know, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be trying to replace the government with a new government. You just want them to get off your back, don't tread on me, and all that kind of shit. But what would it take? Okay, now, I had a conversation, I don't know, it's a couple of years ago, after a different mass shooting, or maybe it was when one of those guys got killed by unarmed guys got killed by a cop. I can't remember, but I was having a conversation about guns. I think it was on the original Breakfast Club channel, and this person mentioned to me that if the government, for example, because I asked the same question, and this person said to me, if the government declared martial law, that would be sufficient reason to rebel, because obviously that's the first sign or a serious sign of dictatorship. And here's the thing about that at the time Barack Obama was the president, and I'm pretty sure that if Barack Obama declared martial law for some reason, no matter how pressing he decided it might seem to be, that there would have been an extremely large outcry against it for sure, and I think some of those people might have been tempted at least to demonstrate with their weapons, if not necessarily to use them in such a case. And I think there would have been cries of tyranny, or tyranny is here, or tyranny's on the horizon, or something like that. But I seriously doubt that would happen if it was under a Republican administration, even one as blatantly incapable as Donald Trump's Republican administration, right? So what they're really saying when they say, they're going to take up weapons against the government if the government turns tyrannical, I would bet you anything they merely mean sort of too far left wing for them. They don't necessarily mean actually tyrannical. If it's just too left for their, too left for them, for whatever reason, however they want to define that. I seriously can't imagine people taking up weapons against the governing power, shooting soldiers and police, if the government was a Republican government. Because they don't want to see that as their enemy. And if martial law wouldn't do it for you, what would? If people just start disappearing in the night, someone comes knocking at the door or busting into people's houses and they just disappear and you never see them again, like what used to happen in various parts of South America back in the 60s and 70s. If that happened, would you rise up? What would it take? What would it take? I really want to know what it would take. And doesn't it depend on you winning that war? Because there's no point throwing your life away on a lost cause. And history is written by the winners, The Civil War was an act of insurrection by the southern states. And the precedent has basically been set that the ruling government will put down insurrection at very high cost. I mean, the northern states' army lost more people than the southern states' armies did. It's one of the few wars that you can say that the winning, in quotation marks, side lost more people in battle. Anyway, I digress. That was an example of insurrection, and it was put down mercilessly by the government. So you have to know that it's called the Civil War now, and there's even Civil War buffs and everything like that, and people have this sort of idea that I don't know. I'm not from the South, so I really shouldn't opine on that. But basically, there is no case where the citizens can rebel against the government with their, even if you've got like bump stocks on your semi-automatics or whatever, You're not going to get there. I don't care how many bullets you own. I don't care how many guns you have. I don't care how careful you think you are, because it's effectively like you're just completely outgunned. What are you going to do against tanks or drones? Seriously, what are you going to do? Much less the heavier firepower that the U.S. military actually does possess. I mean, if the government was actually as tyrannical as it had, I would think it should have to be before people rose up. They would be brutally just mowing people down, you know, like without any care for their humanity whatsoever, just mowing them down. And I wonder, I hate to contemplate, you know, what circumstances would it have to, what would the political climate have to be like for U.S. troops to be deployed against U.S. citizens, and for those troops to actually fire on their own people? I just wonder what that would have to be like. I mean, when the Eastern Bloc was coming down in the late 80s and early 90s, and all the former Soviet satellite countries were shedding their communism, there was a couple of different countries, I think might have been Poland and Hungary, or it might have been Czechoslovakia and Hungary, it's something like that. But yeah, the army was sent in and troops were told to fire, and they're like, no, those are our neighbors. We're not going to do that. And you know, the rest is history, as they say. So what would it take for you to shoot at soldiers? What do you think it would take for soldiers to shoot at American citizens? What would the political climate have to be like? And under what kind of administration do you think that kind of thing would happen? These are all questions I'd like to hear your answers, especially, like I say, from people who own firearms in America, who think that, you know, that's part of the reason guns should be legal, is to commit insurrection. Okay, under what circumstances? Please, I'd love to hear it. I've got a video I'm cooking up in my head about white privilege and white supremacy, because I keep on getting extremely frustrated by watching all these people get blown away by the cops who haven't got any weapon on them, whether it's Stephon Clark or Alton Sterling or other people that have happened just in the past couple of days. I mean, it just seems to keep happening, and it's really pissing me off. And what really pisses me off the most about it is, well, no, about the arguments around it, I suppose is a better way of putting it, is how resistant people are to this idea that there's such a thing as white privilege, and that institutionalized white privilege is by definition a form of white supremacy. I know those aren't comfortable things to talk about, but here's my request. As well as the comments about the gun conversation I was just telling you about, I would like to know, if you don't think there's such a thing as white supremacy and white privilege, fine. Please tell me what the social condition would have to be for you to think that those terms were valid and accurate. What's different about that compared to what's actually going on? That's what I want to know. And I'm very interested in this conversation, and I'm going to be making a much more detailed video. I've been collecting articles now for months and months and months, because from my point of view, it's the preponderance of evidence that makes it a persuasive argument, not just the logic and stuff. So yeah, I really want to hear your points of view, though. It will help me to sort of inform my my own pursuits when I finally come out and make this video. It might be a few weeks before I get around to that, though, because it's a pretty big subject. Anyway, I want to thank you for watching this video, and I'll be back again next Thursday, obviously on The Breakfast Club. I'm not sure who the guest is tomorrow. I'm not even sure if I arranged it yet. I better get on that. Anyway, you'll find out before I see you again, and on Saturday it's JJ Talks anyway, and just in case no one shows up tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Peace.